This project was made possible by the Wallace Foundation, a source of ideas for improving school leadership. Visit www.wallacefoundation.org/principal story.
Good evening, and welcome to a panel discussion about the challenges facing urban school principals here in Tennessee and across the country. I'm Mark Hill, Chief Education Officer for the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce and moderator of this important conversation. The inspiration for tonight's panel on school leadership comes in the form of a new PBS documentary entitled The Principal Story. This compelling documentary tells the story of two school principals in Illinois during the 2008-2007 school year. One in Chicago and one in Springfield. The film paints a dramatic portrait of the challenges facing America's public schools and of the great difference a dedicated principal can make. Funded by the Wallace Foundation, The Principal Story is a national PBS broadcast film and media outreach project. The documentary and related materials are designed to connect educators, policymakers, and the public to reliable and useful resources on this important issue. Before I introduce our panelists, we'd like to start with a brief clip from the documentary to set the context for tonight's discussion.
I became a principal because I want to change the world, really. And I believed that I had the skill set to help teachers become better teachers so that students could be more successful in the classroom and in life.
All children must have a quality education. I believe in that, and they must have it. Are we where we want to be instructionally? No. But the one thing that I decided a long time ago was that I'm going to give it my best, I'm going to give it my all, and I'm going to make sure that those in this building do the same. I love my kids, and better than that, my kids love me. Nobody in this city has that on me. Nobody. We're supposed to be instructional leaders. That's the new term. Leaders who focus on instruction, who focus on good teaching. Because you put something up for a whole group lesson, and as soon as that lesson went up on the board, the child said, hell, I can't count to 5. Then he started throwing crayons. Why? Because you never assessed the readiness. You never assessed the readiness. You never assess the readiness. How can you run a room and you don't know where your children are? These are some great teachers. They're great instructors, but they're not doing what they can do.
72.
Go.
80.
Go.
Every decision we make in this building is around data.
You're new at this, but you can do it. Go. Good.
What is the data telling us that's working right? What is the data telling us that's not working? And what are our next steps going to be?
Brian Stark, 20 to 50.
I thought it were a jump.
What'd you say?
I thought it were a jump.
That's awesome. Ow.
133. That's like 5th grade.
Good job, Daryl.
Good job, Daryl. Are you making fun of me?
Nope.
Oh, all right.
Most of the incidents that occur here at Nash School are emotionally based upon the spirit and the soul. I am angry, I am upset, I feel disheveled and unloved. And this morning you're hollering and screaming at me because I don't have my uniform on. Or you're talking to me because I can't sit in my seat. Or you have the nerve to not let me get breakfast when I'm 5 minutes late and I'm starving. I haven't eaten in a day and a half. And so the only thing I know how to do, because my whole family or my entire community acts up, is being decent and act up. We have to be better for these kids, and it's not always about academics.
The office will be closed.
on, Jane.
I'll call it. Okay. Yeah, we don't want to mess with this. We don't know what's going on.
I always worry, are we triggering the situation? Do we not know the words to say? It's very frightening when you see a child struggling like that. I believe that the leader of the building should be the one to deal with the crisis. And somebody had to act as his advocate and be there to get him the help that he needed. It's not a job. It's way beyond a job. And sometimes, you have regrets because then it becomes your life. But it's worth it, I think.
Good morning, Nash. Good morning. I love you.
Today's principals have to be entrepreneurial. They have to be very, very smart and first and foremost instructional leaders. They have to be able to work with the community. It's a wide variety of skill sets. But then, Dave, what I really measure is our principals' heart. How much do they really believe our children can be successful? How much do they really believe that we can be much better tomorrow than we were today or yesterday?
This time I'd like to introduce our members of the distinguished panel that we have tonight. Start with Dr. Jesse Register. Dr. Register is Director of Metropolitan Nashville Public Schools. We also have Professor Ellen Goldring, who is a Patricia and Rhodes Hart Professor of Educational Policy and Leadership and Department Chair of Leadership, Policy, and Organizations here at Vanderbilt's Peabody College. We have Brenda Steele, Principal at Alex Green Elementary right here in Metropolitan Nashville Public Schools. And we have Dr. Connie Smith, Assistant Commissioner in the Division of Accountability, Teaching, and Learning with the Tennessee Department of Education. I'm going to start with the first question for Dr. Register. Dr. Register, describe an effective school instructional environment, and what does a principal need to do to create and sustain that environment?
Okay, good question. I think that question's been asked and answered many times, so I'll take a little bit different approach to that and talk about engaged students and adults in creating a positive learning community. It's pretty hard to find a perfect learning environment, an educational environment in school, if you don't find adults who are engaged across the board too. Intense focus on learning, on teaching and learning, learning being the main word to emphasize there for adults and students in buildings. How do principals maintain that? I think there are some pieces that are very important, and we saw some of this on the tape. Collaboration is very important. I think administrators, leadership teams in schools must create a collaborative environment. That's one thing that we haven't done very well in public schools historically. Teachers and administrators tend to work in isolation. I think that's a part of our heritage and the ongoing culture of public schools in this country. And the folks here in the audience who are principals have heard me say this many times. The problems that we deal with today, the issues that we deal with are too complex for individuals to solve. We create positive learning environments by being collaborative. And I think that's the one thing that I would say is very important about principals creating and maintaining that learning environment is creating a collaborative culture and an intense focus on improving the quality of instruction. Another comment that was made on the tape that I think is very important is that real focus on learning and instruction.
Brenda, you've been a Metro Schools elementary principal, and for the past 10 years you've been at 3 different schools, Sylvan Park, Amqui, and now at Alex Green Elementary, which is in good standing. What does a principal have to do when you come to a school in that first year to begin turning things around?
First of all, they need to know they don't have to do everything at one time, but what was important for me is to know who I was working with. It was important that I know my students, know what their capabilities were. So data was very interesting to me. I would look at the data. What does it tell me about the child? What does it tell me about the community? And then what I would do is work towards their needs, because a lot of times we go in thinking that we can just go in with our ideas, but we need to work according to what the students need and how we can make them become successful. The other thing is creating that culture of excellence. I think that's really important. High expectations for students. Many times they don't know what they're quite capable of doing unless we encourage that. So the whole culture concept of you can do it was very important for me, as well as getting individuals involved in their lives who believed it also. So even the personnel, it's important that I communicate that explicitly to them, that children are the main focus of what we're about. And then we collaborate to make sure that whole culture, that whole climate is there. And I think that's why improvement has been made.
Dr. Smith, we know there's no magic solutions to education success, but we do know there's probably 3 or 4 things that are really essential, and principal leadership is usually one of those top 3 or 4 issues. So there seems to be consensus about that. What is the state of Tennessee doing to help create outstanding school leaders across the state, or what's in the pipeline to be planned to do?
Well, Mark, we have something called the Tennessee Academy for School Leaders. And all principals are required to attend once every 5 years. So it's our responsibility to make it interesting and appropriate for principals. And so we're really focusing on how to get your arms around all the multi-data that we have in this state. And how do you look at the value added? How do you measure your teacher's effect? How do you evaluate your teachers? And we also have something called the Electronic Learning Center. And we provide that. It's interactive, but we also have podcasts. Tennessee is embarking on the Tennessee Diploma Project. So we have new standards, a new assessment, new expectations, and the most rigorous expectations we believe in the nation. So we're trying to reach out to principals because we know our teachers can teach if they know the expectations in our principals.
Dr. Goldring, we all want effective principals in our schools, and we all want one, so we all agree about that. But what do we know about what that really means? I mean, are able to quantify it? You've maybe done some work on measuring what that might look like as a profile of an educational leader. Tell us a little bit about some of the work that you're doing.
Here at Vanderbilt, we've developed a leadership assessment instrument. You heard in the video, actually, that to provide feedback is very important for learning. We take a perspective that professionals need feedback as well. And in fact, principals tend not to receive feedback about how they're doing in terms of their own leadership and in terms of the core components of effective schooling. So our instrument looked at the literature and really took a stake in terms of what are the core components that we know are associated with improving student achievement. And if you look at that literature, it really focuses on 6 core components. Though they include things such as a focus on a rigorous curriculum for all students, a focus on quality instruction, high performance expectations for all students, developing a culture of learning for adults and children, and also holding adults and children accountable for learning. Those are our core components, and they're included in our assessment instrument. But then you have to ask, how are those components created in a school? They don't just happen. And we arrived at 6 key processes that leaders implement to really achieve those core components. And those include such leadership processes as planning, implementing, advocating for the needs of children, supporting the learning needs of students and adults, and also ongoing monitoring of school improvement efforts. So together, the key processes and the core components really paint a very vibrant picture of what effective instructional leadership looks like, and really can provide ongoing feedback to school principals about how they and their staffs and their schools are progressing along those core components.
Brenda, there's a part in the documentary where the Chicago principal has to deal with the fact that with a teacher is just not cutting it in the classroom, and she ends up having to terminate or cancel that teacher out of the profession in the middle of the school year. How do you approach underperforming teachers, and do you feel like you've got everything you need in your toolbox, so to speak, to be able to do that?
For an underperforming teacher, I think it's very important that you give them all the support they need, just like you would do a student. You want them to be successful. So I make sure that I model what I think good practices should look like, as well as provide them a mentor within our building. And that is a collaborative team working together to build those strengths of that teacher. I'm not saying all the time that's going to be successful, but we need to provide all the opportunities to be successful. There are many professional development opportunities that are available that we could use for classroom management and things like that. That's very important. But there comes a time when you have to have that discussion. And you might have to discuss that with the teacher, that even with all that support in place, with all these things happening, that teaching may not be the profession that they need, because when we all boil down to it, children are important and you're affecting their lives. So there comes a point in a principal's life, they have to make that decision. I know it's very difficult to do, but you must make it because it affects children.
Dr. Rescher, the documentary ends with the Springfield teacher being reassigned to a middle school after spending 6 years at the elementary school, building that team of faculty, building those relationships with the parents and the community. And so my question is sort of a two-part one. We recognize that successful principals have to do that. They have to cultivate and build a faculty and those community relationships that are so important, but there also may be a time where they're needed maybe more elsewhere once they've done that. Is there a particular number of years where you would like to see a successful principal stay in place before you consider reassignment? And then what goes into your factoring when you are reassigning principals? What kind of criteria do you use?
There can't be a set formula. There really isn't one. I've seen some principals who need to move fairly regularly. If they stay in a place over about 5 years, they tend to get stale. It's almost a personal thing, though. And then I've seen others of principals who've been able to stay for 10 years or longer in one school and continue to grow and be successful. I think we really have to look at individuals and determine if they're continuing to make progress. So really no set formula there. Some people can move fairly quickly. If they're being promoted, if they're moving into bigger schools or bigger jobs, or if they're moving from into high school work, something of that nature. They're in a district like ours. We have 139 schools now, and there are vacancies and changes, and sometimes it's important for the district to move people. But I really think the bottom line is that we need to create stability in schools. Principals need to be there for a few years. 3 years, 4 years, 5 years should be a norm goal to work for. Because if you're changing people more often than 3 to 5 years, then that's just too fast to establish that environment in a school to make it effective.
So when you say
real pressures sometimes in districts like this one, where districts where principals are getting older and retiring and big turnover, or if there are other challenges facing districts, it's very hard sometimes to maintain that stability. So I think it's very important in school systems like this one to try to create a pipeline of new leaders coming in and a stable environment in the schools. Not good for the schools to change too often.
When you say some leaders might be ready for quicker transitions, is that sort of in the lower end of that spectrum, 3 years, or is it 2 years? What do you have in mind when you say quickly?
I think it's not productive if principals are moved in and out of schools. It's not productive for schools if it's less than 3 years. Right. I would like to see 5. Okay. But that's impractical in a lot of places.
Sure. Dr. Goldring, from your review of the literature, how has the role of the school principal changed over the past 20 or 30 years? And how far away are we from this hope that an outstanding instructional leader is at every school?
The role has changed dramatically and quickly. And I think part of it is if we just think back in history about the expectations and the role of schooling first, and then think about the changes in the principalship. Today, the expectations are for all students to graduate high school. We have standards, ever-increasing standards for all students, where in the past, there was not the expectations that everyone would even go to high school, let alone finish high school. We all remember the days where we said that schooling had a babysitting component, and some children learned and some children weren't expected to learn. So the role has changed because our expectations for education in this country has really changed. And because of that, the skill set that's needed for a principal, both in terms of the heart and the mind, is really different. In the video, and there's lots of examples, the analytic skills that are expected and needed to be successful in the principalship today is relatively new. And in the past, we heard a lot about managers versus leaders, and we also heard about leading by intuition. Today, the role is much more professional. There's a body of knowledge and a body of expertise that leaders need. Analytic skills in terms of data, a deep understanding of what high-quality instruction is. Principals are expected to work closely with their teachers to really lead them as teacher leaders and to lead them into being effective instructors. So that body of knowledge is very, very different. And I think because of the changes and because of the expectations and the expertise that's required to be an effective principal, it's going to take some time until we reach the goal of having all schools have effective principals. Some of that is because we need to think creatively about how we attract people into the role, helping them understand that it actually is a different role and that there really could be new pipelines of students from undergraduate majors that may be interested in the role, and also partly because we need to think about alternative routes to the principalship.
Dr. Connie Smith, as you travel across the state and really across the country, from your experiences, how does an effective school principal communicate a vision for high expectations that really permeates the whole school?
I really think Brenda said it best, and she's one of the best in the state. Effective principals model what they expect from their staff. And no job is too tough, and no job they won't do. It's not what they say so much, it's what they do. And you see effective principals who know the names of every student that they have. And they like being in school, and there's a joy and a passion there. It's an intangible, but it's there. And they also know which students are proficient in reading and which are not. And you heard in the film that the principals were talking the data. That's teacher talk and principal talk. They know the proficiency rates. They know the federal benchmarks. And every piece of data, to me, has the face of a child. And those principals are the ones that are really with it. They also have a sense of urgency and a focus and a clarity of purpose around what's being taught, and that's the curriculum, and how they're teaching all students. And in our work with turnaround schools and turnaround systems, you'll see there are 5 or 6 variables that have to be present, and that's a focus on what's being taught, standards-aligned curriculum, what's going to be assessed, and a knowledge of what the assessment means. We do a lot of testing. It's what you do with the results. How can you inform and improve your instruction? And are we teaching all students? And how much time are we spending in the schedule in the day? And so it's a continuous assessment. It's a focus, and you can feel it. There's a feeling tone when you go into those schools.
Anybody else want to jump in on that? Great observation. We have several questions from our studio audience I want to throw out really to the entire panel and hope that you all will jump in. This one's from an assistant principal in our audience, so a future outstanding school leader, Dr. Register. And it's about urban schools dealing with high student mobility rates and even high faculty turnover rates. How does an effective school leader manage that?
The district has to play a role in that. I know we've had a number of conversations, and I see principals in the audience here who are principals of schools where there is a great mobility rate around. We have to look for consistency. Where do we need to be the same? We had a conversation just in the last day or two in the office about supplemental programs for students who are not achieving with the basic programs. And if we have high mobility rates, we need to look at those and look at the instructional programs that we use and make sure that there is consistency at least in those areas where students are mobile. It's a real challenge in districts like this where our mobility rate's extremely high all across the district. So we have to look for those common areas where we need to have common approaches to instruction. Does it mean that every school has to be exactly alike? The answer is no. That's not very effective. But similar instructional practices are very important. Another factor that I think comes into play there is how do we communicate? How do we communicate from one school to the next? Does a student's record get there as soon as the student does? Does a receiving principal know how to place a child, or is that data following the student as quickly as it should, so that the day that student gets there, the receiving school or principal and teachers have the information that they need to continue the progress of the child, rather than the child being lost for a while and having to catch up. Data tracking is important.
Some of the things that we learned in studying other urban districts or district policies about student placement, and for example, magnet schools often have less mobility than other schools, because if a family moves, they can still leave their child in the same school because they're not dependent on a catchment zone or attendance zone. And obviously different districts have different transportation policies. Many districts have transportation for magnet schools, so that helps support that policy about mobility for students. So I think one question that urban districts have to ask themselves is, what are their mobility patterns? Who's moving from what neighborhoods? And are there some attendance zone issues that can be addressed and transportation issues that can be addressed? That's on the student side. And on the teacher side, one of the things that's really interesting is that we hear often about high teacher mobility or high teacher turnover, but what we don't hear about is who's moving to which schools, and are teachers moving out of the profession, and which are the teachers who are moving out of the profession and moving to which schools. So research strongly suggests that less effective teachers are moving to high poverty schools, and more effective teachers tend to move from high poverty schools to more affluent schools. And I think, again, in terms of district policy, it's important to get a handle on the movements as it relates to teacher effectiveness and to the students that are being served, rather than just look at teacher mobility as either a positive or a negative, because maybe it's actually, as we heard in the video and heard before, that there are some teachers that really should be counseling out of teachers, and mobility may be actually a good thing. So we don't have a good handle on what those numbers really mean.
In a district, in an urban district like this, the student mobility is harder to handle than it is actually in a lot of cities. We saw Chicago on the tape, and we know about public transportation in cities like New York City and Philadelphia, and it's not the same in Davidson County. Yes. Public transportation is not available to all students, so we're more restricted in what we can do to allow students to stay in schools, because many times they just don't have the transportation from one school to another. So that becomes a real determining factor on the degree of mobility that we see in a district like this.
We actually have some good news in the state. Clarksville, Montgomery County has the mobility rate due to the military base. And it's an example of effective practice. And so we're studying to see how they are meeting the proficiency rates with the high mobility that they have. So it shows us, and generally what I'm learning is that the teacher is the answer, because as soon as the child walks in the door, they keep up with where that child is, and they're doing a formative assessment of where they are proficiency-wise. But I agree with the superintendent in that the capacity building that's lent from the central office to the schools is the responsibility for tracking those kids across all schools. But the teachers in Clarksville, Montgomery County know the kids are mobile. Every 6 weeks, some move, and so they're keeping them proficient because they are being collaborative, as you've said.
But I think the key, though, is exactly what has been said. If you know that students are constantly moving, and it's important that you get information about them, it is important that the teacher has some form of assessment, so she will know exactly where that baby is before they're able to really direct them in engaging activities. So contacting that school, I'll get on the phone in a minute, faxing information to me about, can you even fax it to me before you mail it. So that's important.
We're just on the verge of taking our data warehouse to much higher levels of it, where literally every teacher in our district can access, teachers access information about all students immediately. We need to do things like that. We need to be smart with the use of technology so that any principal and any teacher can access information on students immediately when they move, and that we have that test data available for students, for teachers and principals to see as students move from school to school.
So from what I'm hearing, a principal has to play a key role really in keeping on top of that. If you've got a school with a high mobility rate, it often falls to the principal or the counselor or a team of administrators to keep track of those students coming in and out of the building and make sure that teachers do have that data and that record.
We have a high school principal here, Tony Majors, who I'll point out does something that a lot of high school principals don't do. We have to be collaborative also. Principals oftentimes will not communicate with each other, and I highlight Tony because I know Tony and the other high school principals in that part of our county, Cane Ridge and Antioch and the other high schools in that part of the county communicate with each other and collaborate, and that's very important. That's something that you don't see in a lot of places. And in fact, in that community, students are moving around those 3 or 4 schools all the time. The fact that they communicate very effectively together is very important in keeping up with those students and seeing that the gaps are minimized when they change.
There are a number of principal preparation training programs, and how do you identify the potential for a future outstanding principal? And take it a step further, to what extent is a successful school principal allowed to groom their successor and develop that leader in your experience? Throw that out to the panel.
Well, I can talk a little bit about some of the ways that we think about it. We look for past examples of leadership and past examples of success in those leadership efforts, whether that be in formal or informal leadership positions. In the tape, they actually talked about the principal developing teacher leaders and also future principals. And so they're in the collaborative environment of schooling that I think everyone here on the panel has really been trying to describe and embrace. There are abundant opportunities for leadership to emerge. So I would say that's one thing. And the other thing we've heard a lot, both in the video and on the panel, is modeling. And there's lots of opportunities to see, we say making your leadership visible, and to be able to model those types of qualities that one would want to see in a principal. So for example, things that one might not think about but are very important for the principalship, more on the heart side, not the mind, but one is taking risks, dealing with disappointment and setbacks, and being willing to show one's vulnerability. And so there's lots of opportunities through a person's career to look for examples of those types of things. And the second thing I would say are the skill sets. So if you have a teacher who embraces data, understands it, and begins to emerge as a leader amongst teachers in the analytics side of the principalship, those would be an important skills that that we would look for.
Yeah, from my perspective as a superintendent, I think it's important to develop the pipeline of future leaders. There need to be opportunities for people to develop their leadership skills in the work environment, job embedded, if you will. And I think a win all the way around is when we support building instructional leadership teams in schools. So it's teacher leaders, it's for us consulting teachers, model classroom teachers, assistant principals, a whole set of leaders that are school-based. and a skill that principals have to develop then is how to be an instructional leader of a leadership team. When we broaden that team, when we give more people opportunities to assume leadership roles in the schools, then we need to be able to take a good look and communicate with our principals about the future, about the pipeline, and then we need to reach out and get those people and develop leadership initiatives, leadership programs for those people, so that we bring along, so that we're working on the next generation of leaders. It's very important. And another thing about leadership I think that's very important is that we need to think of it in terms of organizational capacity and individual capacity development at the same time. We need to build our organizational capacity of instructional leadership in our district. Schools need to build an organizational leadership capacity of leaders in their schools, and that needs to happen at the same time that individuals are dealing with their own leadership skills.
There's a scene in the documentary where the Chicago principal is shown working late at night on her laptop, and then she's in a community parents meeting, only 20 show up, and you can just see that the wind is out of her sails. How does an effective principal recharge their batteries, and what role can the central office play to help a principal that clearly is on the right track, but as we all know throughout the school year, there are the moments in time when you just wonder and you need that support? Brenda, you may have been there, I don't know.
Bragging to Brenda.
What are some ways that a principal can recharge?
I would say I am a student at all times. I'm always learning, so I'm always trying to figure out ways in which to capture greatness, and that's the way I put it. I'm looking for success in everything I do. I'm a risk taker. So I've learned that I don't need anyone to kind of push me to do things differently, because I know there are going to be times when you're not going to have 100% of your parents coming in or 100% of people doing these things. But when you know you've done everything you can for students, when you've done everything you know you're supposed to do for your school to improve, then the joy comes within, and I think that's what I look for. When I know I've done the best that I can do, then there's success there for me. So I think you're going to, as a instructional leader, you're going to have to be a little hard and not always look for a pat on the back when you think you ought to get a pat on the back. And that's basically what I think about.
And you have to carve out some time for yourself also. I mean, it's a 24/7 job, and you would catch yourself, I would catch myself constantly doing that and rethinking it and what about the job. And so you have to carve out some time for yourself. And you put your question initially in the guise of what did you learn in higher education in your training about how to be a principal. And I went to great schools, Columbia University and this university, but you never can learn enough to be able to get those surprises on the first day on the job. So there is no preparation. You have to really be have a sense of humor, I think, and be flexible. Yeah. And I think you've got to learn from your mistakes. You've got to be able to say, I made a mistake, and learn from it.
But I've observed in Metro through my work with the principals here how important the peer relationships are, and having both opportunity, formal and probably mostly informal, and I'm looking at so many of you here today, just the opportunity to rely on, talk through. I mean, we all do that in our profession and touch base and think about the job, and I think some of that's can be structured by the district, but I think a lot of that develops over time through informal relationships.
My answer is simpler than that. As an old elementary principal, the way to recharge is to go to kindergarten. Go visit kindergarten. And let's broaden that a little bit. Let's talk about, it's hard late at night on the computer to be full of energy, but the great advantage for principals is to get engaged with their students, to go in the classrooms, to see what's going on, to interact with teachers, and that almost invariably works.
Do a little dreaming with me, if you would. Imagine there's no budgetary, legislative, or bargaining agreement barriers. I'm really dreaming now, but we're going to do that. What do we need to do now so that there's an excellent principal in every school in the next 3 years if we had none of those barriers in front of us?
3 years is pretty quick.
We don't have much time.
I think we've talked about a lot of those things that it takes to really build leadership capacity or instructional leadership capacity in districts. Getting people together, helping people, letting people learn together is a critical way to do that. We did a retreat this summer, and we had really good pieces of that retreat and some that weren't quite so good. But what I saw was the collaboration there that really helped pull people together. And we had about 300 people there at our retreat this summer. So giving people an opportunity to work together and staying focused on those things that are most important. The focus has to be on improving instruction. It's all about instruction. It's all about quality instruction. It's all about doing everything we can to improve instruction and giving people the opportunity to learn. Everyone doesn't know how to be an instructional leader yet, but that has to be our goal. And I think if there were one thing I would say in 3 years or 5 years, it's for us to have an intense focus on instruction and helping principals and leaders learn how to be instructional leaders in schools.
I would probably add one additional point, and I think that's professional judgment and professional autonomy. I don't know this to be a fact, but I think some people are deterred from the role because they fear that the weight of bureaucracy and rules will prohibit their ability to independently make judgments and be accountable for the judgments and for the implementation decisions that they make. So I think we need to think about, in my mind there's always a demand, and we want to increase the pool of people that want to do this job, and I think that professional judgment and treating people as professionals and creating the conditions, those are your budgetary conditions, for people to be successful in the role. I think it's very important.
I think you need to pay them what they're worth because they're the CEOs of one of the most important organizations in our nation. And I think you need to hold them accountable for their performance. And I think you need to offer them the resources in the schoolhouse so that every child can have access and adequacy around what's sufficient to meet the needs of every child. And every child is different. So when you try to give everybody the same thing, equity-wise, you miss the adequacy issue, which is what do I have that's sufficient to meet the needs of students who are below proficient, proficient, and advanced, and to challenge everyone, and to have the professional development that I need as the CEO of this organization to really perform up to my ability.
What relevant and practical skills can a college of education teach principal leaders that would make a difference that maybe they're not teaching now?
I think to understand the difference between what achievement means and what value added means. What impact do you have as in-school variables on moving students from below proficient to proficient and advanced? And just an innate understanding of why that's important to begin documenting improvement.
I think we have a key role, and I'm proud, looking at my dean here, that I think Peabody really plays that role. Not all programs and interventions are created equal. There is a body of evidence and there is research that suggests some practices actually do work better than others. And I think one of the key challenges for leaders in the realm of data, there's one side of data which I think colleges of education have a really important role. That's the whole analytic side, as you mentioned, achievement, what's good assessments, how do we assess. Second would be around quality instruction. What do we know about developing quality instruction and what type of instruction is better suited for which type of children. But then the third realm is what has become known as evidence-based practices, research-based practices. I think so much or much of what happens in education is implemented and it's not exactly clear why, and it's not exactly clear where the knowledge base is or what it is. And I think research universities that have access to the knowledge base about what's working and why, or at least what's the body of evidence, and how to understand where there's very strong evidence or weak evidence. I think we can really help principals at least ask the important questions when they're deciding what to implement in their schools and how to implement for teachers and for kids, to ask those important questions. What do we think the outcome should be, and on what basis are we making those types of decisions?
Brenda, I'm guessing that everything that you learned about how to become an effective principal you didn't necessarily learn in college or through a training program. Is there anything that comes to mind that you wish maybe or that you would have had beforehand? Or
not that I would have had beforehand. I was fortunate that my principal was my mentor. Right. And before I became a principal, she allowed me the opportunity to shadow her many days and to see exactly what was going on in the school. So I kind of knew what I needed to be doing before I became a principal. I think it's important that if you do desire to become a principal, that you need to see all the things that go along with the job. It is not as rosy as you think, and you don't think it's for the money. It's not for that. But there's so many things that you will face as a principal, and are you willing to face those things? But always focus on student achievement, and that's always been something I've looked at. How do we improve student achievement? But most of all, have a respect and love for those individuals who are teaching your children. I think that's important too. So by me having a mentor, I think that was very purposeful. I think that that may be why I am who I am, because I learned those attributes I thought were really outstanding from them.
There's always sometimes a struggle in urban school districts to recruit teachers and principals to reflect the student population and demographics of a district, if you will. And with Nashville having such a large international population that continues to grow, we've got some schools that are 50% ELL, or students who English is a second language. How are we doing on trying to recruit maybe the next group of principals to begin to reflect that population? Is that a national issue, and how are we progressing in Tennessee?
It's a national issue.
Yeah.
It's a national issue. And Tennessee is an immersion state, which means, and we have some data that shows the second year a student is immersed into elementary education, they will move into proficiency as a subgroup. So we've got some good news around that, but it's really sort of brand new. It's maybe 3 years old, I'd say.
The diversity of administrative teams is not nearly as diverse as our student population. So I think it's a real challenge to us. And as we look at our data, what we found is that we are a very diverse school system. We're 85, 90 languages in our school system, and a big immigrant population coming in on a regular basis. The problems, though, compound themselves when we break down the data for those students who are low performing. They're not just English language learners. Many of them also live in poverty. Some of them have special needs. So when you compound those issues, when you find children who move in, who live in poverty, who also don't speak English and their parents don't speak English, and sometimes we neglect to find the learning problems that they have, then those are the real challenges that we face. I think cultural awareness is very important. Cultural competence is probably the word that we need to use, or the words that we need to use. We need to pay attention to learning how to work with a diverse culture. We are the future of this country. This is what this country is going to look like. We're growing more diverse all the time. There aren't any places that are immune from that. So what we have to do is learn how to be successful with many groups of students with whom we haven't been successful in the past, and that's developing a cultural competence.
I think it also gets to the question of recruiting wider educator pool. Are we recruiting only nationally, and how are people thinking about recruitment into the workforce of education?
Let me finish with one question. We're on the campus of Peabody College, Vanderbilt University, and thank you for hosting us this evening. What are some ways that universities can collaborate with urban school districts to not only improve the cadre of principal leadership, but also teacher effectiveness as well?
Well, I think urban competence is really important. We're having conversations with Vanderbilt now about programs to train teachers to be very competent in an urban setting, and we're focusing on a couple of areas. We're focusing on content knowledge, but we're also focusing on urban knowledge. How do you work with a diverse population? And so those two areas really come together, I think, in teacher development.
I think there's another important aspect for collaboration, and there's the model in Chicago, well established, is the Chicago Consortium, where universities and school districts can partner to do rigorous evaluation research and to help provide capacity in areas where the district may need assistance or may have certain questions that they want to answer in terms of evaluating ongoing initiatives or even new initiatives. And so I think the relationships can be both in terms of training, but also kind of an evaluation partnership and new directions.
Universities have the research centers, and we need a transfer of effective practice. Teachers learn from teachers, principals learn from principals. So universities can help us know what works and what research says is very data-driven and works with which population of students in which setting. So they're very important to us as practitioners.
We're blessed in Nashville to have a large number of higher
Absolutely.
education institutions, and I hear we're taking advantage of that. Connie, as you look across the state, are we maximizing that in some of the other urban centers like Memphis, Knoxville, and Chattanooga, or is there more work to do there?
We are. I'm glad to say. We absolutely are. The University of Memphis. We have Knoxville, University of Tennessee Knoxville, and Chattanooga. I'm looking for someone to reach out to Jackson, Madison County, which is a high priority district and needs some assistance. But higher education has stepped up in the state to assist us with high priority schools and high priority systems, and we're very grateful.
Please join me in thanking tonight's panel.
This project was made possible by the Wallace Foundation, a source of ideas for improving school leadership. Visit www.wallacefoundation.org/principal story. This has been a production of Vanderbilt University and Nashville Public Television.